Growing your own food doesn't have to start and end with growing your own vegetables, fruits, and even herbs. I have learned how to grow some of my own spices for my own pantry, and I want to show you how to as well. Today I'm going to show you how I grow my own cayenne pepper, paprika, and chili powder to last our family all year.
First, we have cayenne pepper. Cayenne peppers are very prolific, especially if they're grown in full sun and especially in the heat of the summer. In the past, I have grown cayenne peppers that are typically about 4 to 6 inches in length. They're pretty small, although a lot of them will grow on one plant. This year, I grew a new variety called Arapaho that I got from Territorial Seed Company. And the reason I planted and grew this kind was because these peppers are 8 to 9 inches long. And I wanted that because, as you'll see soon, it makes it a lot easier to dehydrate and then grind having a larger pepper. The key to harvesting these peppers, as is the case for the other ones we're going to be looking at today, is to wait until they are fully mature, which in this case is a bright red. You really don't want any dark spots or any green spots left on the pepper. You want to let it fully ripen before you pick it, and then use some kind of a clippers or garden shears or something like that to cut them off the plant. They don't dislodge easily, and you could cut or tear a whole limb off of a plant without realizing it. Once you've got them harvested, then you bring them inside. If you want, give them a quick wash, and then I highly recommend that you get a pair of gloves to protect your hands. These are hot peppers and they will burn your skin. They will burn anything your fingers touch, so you definitely want to protect your skin with these gloves. From here, I like to cut my cayenne peppers in relatively uniform pieces. And the reason for this is because they will dry at a uniform rate. Now, how picky you get with how small or how big your peppers are going to be on the dehydrator tray is really up to you. The larger that you keep them, the longer they're going to have to dry. Some people don't even cut them at all, but I prefer to cut them. Another reason that you might want to cut them is I like to take out the seeds and the ribbing of the cayenne peppers just because to me they're hot enough the way that they are. But if you want a really super hot cayenne pepper, then you can leave some of the ribbing and some of the seeds in there as you choose. When I'm putting the pepper pieces on the dehydrating trays themselves, I really don't worry too much about getting them too close together because as they dehydrate, they are going to shrink in size. So as long as they are not on top of each other, I don't mind if they're touching a little bit just to be able to get more out of the space that I have on my tray. After they are all cut up and put on the tray, I put them in my dehydrator and then I set the temperature to 125 degrees. The amount of time that it takes for anything in a dehydrator to dehydrate is highly dependent on a lot of factors such as the temperature, but even more importantly, the humidity, and also just the size and the thickness of the walls of your peppers. But at the very least, expect your cayenne peppers to dehydrate for several hours. Check them every few hours just to make sure that they are coming along nicely, and then you will stop the process when they are dry enough to where you can snap them and get a clean break. You don't want any moisture left in the peppers themselves. Once your peppers are dry, you have a couple of options. You can grind them or you can pack them whole in a jar. And that's what I'm doing for most of my peppers today. The thing that you'll learn about growing and dehydrating and using your own spices is that they do tend to cake and get hard with time. And so it's preferable to only grind what you'll need for the next month or two, and then just keep grinding them as you need them. You'll have a better flavor and a better texture, and you won't have to deal with so much of the hardening that is very natural in this process. So I'm putting my peppers mostly in a mason jar, and I'm going to seal it up and put it in a dark area. And they will last a couple of years this way. That way, if you want to grind your own cayenne pepper for powder or your own crushed red pepper flakes, or you want to use them in a medicinal remedy of some sort, you have them ready to grind fresh anytime you need them. Now I'm also going to go ahead and grind some for a small amount of cayenne pepper to put in my pantry. For this, I use a dedicated coffee grinder, and this is only used for spices. It's not used for coffee anymore. And the good thing about this coffee grinder, it's very inexpensive, but depending on how fine you want the product is how much you're going to spin it. So if you just want crushed red pepper flakes, you might just pulse it a few times until you get the consistency that you want. But if you want a full-on ground cayenne pepper, then you're going to continue to grind it until it gets to be that powdery substance. Now, I will warn you that when you do this, and if you grind it into a powder, I recommend taking about a minute or two break to let that powder settle. Because what's going to happen is if you open it, then it's going to come out and it's going to be natural that you're going to get it in your eyes and in your face and in your nose. And unless you want to clear out your sinuses in short order, I recommend letting it settle because it's very, very hot and can be very irritating. So make sure it settles and then you'll be ready to put it in the spice jar. The last step is one you do not want to skip, and that is to make sure that the jar that you use is labeled. You are going to want this to be able to get to quickly and to know exactly what you have, especially if you're doing more than one spice. You want to know exactly which one is the cayenne pepper. Next, paprika. There are different types of peppers that you can grow to create your own paprika, and there are two that I have in my garden this year. The first is called the Hungarian paprika. It is a smaller fruit with thinner walls, and I have found it to be a little bit more fussy in the garden. It hasn't produced as prolifically as the other peppers that I grow, and so I decided last year to also try a different kind of paprika called the Alma paprika. Now, the Alma paprika is very different in that the shape of these paprika peppers is very different from the other ones. It's round, and not only that, the walls of these peppers are very thick, which is really a good thing because for the amount of peppers that I'm able to get off of the plant, I'm actually able to get more spice out of that because the walls are so thick. I have found both types of paprika peppers to be a little bit harder to grow. As you can see with the plant on the left side, it has succumbed to some kind of problem. I'm assuming it's some kind of disease that occasionally I'll get with different peppers. But thankfully, usually it doesn't show up until after I've been able to get a decent harvest. And as you can tell from this planting so far, only one has been affected. So this year I was able to get quite a great harvest of these paprika peppers in just a few plants. When we get the paprika peppers in the kitchen, most of this process is very similar to what you just saw with the cayenne peppers. The only difference is if you grow the Alma paprika, because the walls are so thick and because of the shape of the pepper itself, I've just found that I cut it differently. Instead of splitting it in half and quartering it, I cut it more like I do a bell pepper around the core. But other than that, I still try to use the same method. And as much as I can try to cut them in uniform size pieces, they are going to shrivel up, but I want to try to make sure that they dry at about the same rate as each other. If in this case I also have the Hungarian paprika that is going to be dehydrated at the same time, I will usually keep it in larger chunks to make up for the largeness of the paprika Alma peppers. As you can see on a close-up of these Alma paprika peppers, the walls are extremely thick. And that's one reason I really enjoy growing these and using them for paprika spice in my pantry. Next, they go into the dehydrator, and one thing that I usually do have to do with these Alma paprika peppers is I usually have to take out one of the trays in the dehydrator above the tray I'm putting in just because they are so thick and I need that extra space. So that's really the only thing that I have to do different when I'm dehydrating these paprika peppers. They still are going to dehydrate at 125 degrees, but I have found that they typically take a little bit longer to dehydrate, again, just because they're a little bit thicker. If you grow a paprika pepper like the Hungarian, they obviously are not going to require as much time. Either way, you want to check it every few hours just to see the progress. And again, the way that you know that they are ready is they tend to be a little bit brittle and they can snap easily. That shows that they are ready to be stored, and if you would like to go ahead and grind them. After they are dehydrated, it's time to either put them in a jar and save them the way they are, like we did with the cayenne peppers, or you can go ahead and grind them. At this time, I needed some more paprika. I had just used the last paprika that I had from last year's harvest, so I needed to go ahead and grind what I have. One thing I have noticed too about paprika that hasn't always been the case with the other spices is that it does tend to get fine and powdery, and sometimes I take a coffee brush just to be able to get every last bit out of the coffee grinder. Volume-wise, you can see that with just a couple of dehydrator trays, I was able to get a small jar of paprika spice. My paprika peppers in the garden are actually not done yet. There are still some that are green that I need to wait to turn to red. So I'm hopeful that I'll get another batch before the end of the season. But just to give you an idea of volume of what you might be able to expect, I grew, I think, about 4 plants for this amount. Of course, where you live and how your crops end up growing and maturing, and from season to season, this can vary, but at least that will give you kind of an idea if you're trying to decide how many to plant about what you might be able to expect. Finally, we have chili powder. Chili powder is a staple in my kitchen, and I have wanted for years to be able to grow the peppers that I could make chili powder out of from my own garden. Now, chili powder connoisseurs will tell you that you have to grow a specific type or blend of peppers to make true chili powder like you're used to. But after spending some time researching this and having a hard time, frankly, getting any direct answer, I realized that you can get as simple or as complex as you want when it comes to making your own chili powder. If you're one of those that you want to play with different tastes and textures and flavors, then go for it. There are lots of different options. But if you're like me and you just want something simple, then this particular kind is one you might want to consider. It's called the Amazing 2, and I bought it from Johnny's Seeds. And the reason I bought it is because in the seed catalog, it talked about how this is a great variety of pepper to grow if you want to have your own homegrown chili powder. And I have to say, after 2 years of growing this pepper, I could not be happier with it. Number one, it is the hands down most prolific pepper that I grow. As you can see, it is loaded. To be honest, I probably didn't even have to grow it this year because I harvested so much off of it last year. I dehydrated them. I still have some in jars, but because we do eat a lot of chili powder, I didn't want to take a risk. I definitely wanted it. And to be honest, it's fun to grow something in the garden, especially in the heat of the summer that you know is going to do well. It kind of gives you that encouragement as a gardener. The key, again, to harvesting these peppers, just like cayenne, just like paprika, is you want them to fully mature. And in the case of the Amazing 2 chili pepper, you're going to wait until they are entirely bright red. That means that they are ready to be picked. Once we get them into the kitchen, you'll notice a very similar process. Definitely don't skip the gloves. Even though the chili powder that this produces isn't extremely hot, there is a slight kick to it, and the peppers themselves are a little bit spicy, so be sure to protect your fingers that way. With these chili peppers, they are generally uniform size. They're very similar, and so I usually just cut the top off, and then I will half them, and I will take the seeds and as much of the ribbing as I can out. If you want a spicier chili powder, you might leave some of that in, but for me, I usually take it out. After they are all cut, we put them in the dehydrator, again at 125 degrees. And I would say that these don't take as long as paprika peppers, but they take longer than the cayenne peppers. The walls of these fruit are a little bit thicker than with cayenne, so they're going to take a little bit longer. After they are completely dry, then you can make the decision to go ahead and jar them as they are and then grind them as you need them, or you can go ahead and grind them now, keeping in mind that just like the others that we talked about, because this is a homegrown, home ground process without any extra fillers or preservatives or anything like that. Anti-caking agents generally is what you'll find in spices you get from the store. Because it doesn't have any of those anti-caking agents, it will tend to get a little bit hard. So if you have a lot of these chili peppers that you have grown and you're wanting to grind up, you might want to do this again in batches. Now, don't worry if you have a jar of any of these spices that you've ground recently and it tends to stick on the sides. Usually just a quick breaking up with a knife or something like that will get it back to where it needs to be. So don't worry too much about that. But in general, I wouldn't grind a year's worth of any of these spices, for example. Just make sure you have enough to cover you for a few months until you can grind the next batch. I think you'll find few things as satisfying as knowing that you have grown your own peppers to be able to convert into your own spices. You can experiment with different varieties, different flavors. Have some fun with it.
As you can see, there are lots of options when it comes to growing your own spices, and I hope today's video has inspired you to grow more of your own. And if you're like I was as a beginning gardener and you thought that growing your own food was the biggest challenge, only to figure out that learning how to use it most efficiently was an even bigger challenge, then I invite you to check out my online courses, Harvest to Kitchen. Depending on what you're harvesting out of your garden, one of the options may be exactly what you need to be able to get the most out of your harvest. The link is in the description.